Well, in the proton, which is the basis of all the atomic periodic table, the proton would not be stable at all with just mass and energy. It would be asymmetric and it would self-destruct and there would be no universe. There could never be a hydrogen atom, for example. The proton and the electron form the hydrogen atom. But if you just consider the mass and energy, which is quarks, I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but the proton is made up of two up quarks and a down quark. These are the smallest quarks, and the electron, its smallest mass, stable mass. So those are the three things, and this is why we call our model triadic. We call it the Triadic Dimensional Vortical Paradigm, TDVP. Everything is triadic because it's made of mass, energy, and the third non-physical thing. And it's the proof is a mathematical proof that's based on Fermat's last theorem. But nothing would be stable. This means that before there was any physical thing in the universe, there had to be something that was non-physical. Okay, what else is there? Reality is our experience. And we experience mass and energy through the five senses. It turns out that these five senses are really fragments of what I'll call a spiritual sense. The spiritual sense is a combination of all of those. It's an awareness. It's awareness of everything. And this is what human beings are evolving toward. What Dr. Bucky, who is a Canadian, I think he was actually a dentist, but he wrote a book called Cosmic Consciousness. And he says that the next step in evolution, in human evolution, is from normal consciousness to what he calls cosmic consciousness. And that a few people had achieved that. And he gave some criteria for that, and this is kind of where the word enlightenment came from too, because it generally is accompanied by an experience of light and sound, but then it all is integrated in this expanded consciousness. Well, in the model that Dr. Nepi and I have worked out, mathematically, it turns out that there are 9 dimensions. There are the 3 dimensions of space, but there are also 3 dimensions of time and 3 dimensions of consciousness. And they all work together. Excuse me. They all work together, and the whole universe is kind of like, do you know what a Mobius strip is? Have you heard that term?
I've heard the term, but I don't fully understand it.
Okay. It's a self-referential geometric form. There's another thing called the Klein bottle. the Klein bottle is like a Mobius strip, except that it's three-dimensional, whereas the Mobius strip is two-dimensional. Well, reality, if you can imagine this, is like expanding the number of dimensions to where you have 9 dimensions, but it's self-referential. This explains why all of the elementary particles, they're not really particles. The particle physicists are off on the wrong track because they're not particles. They're what Dr. Nepi and I call vortexes or vortices. They are energy vortexes. And they combine like drops of water combine. So the quarks don't combine like little particles sticking together with gluons and mesons and all these other ephemeral particles that appear and disappear in nanoseconds and supposedly give mass to the particles like the compounds like the proton. Anyway, when you ask yourself, you've got mass, energy, space, and time, you've got this other measurable element at the quantum level. What could it be? The only other thing we experience, and it actually is the only thing we experience directly, is consciousness. So we call this, a mathematician works with symbols, not just numbers, of course, that's arithmetic, but with symbols that represent something. And they're functions and variables and all of these things that go in to make up the mathematics of it. But what are we going to call it? All of the letters of the English alphabet and all the letters of the Greek alphabet have been used, many of them multiple times. So we decided to use the third letter of the Phoenician or Hebrew alphabet, which is Gimel. And why? Because it's the third letter. This is a third form of reality. Not only that, Gimel in Hebrew means camel or conveyance or bridge. This is a bridge between matter and consciousness, or between material world and spiritual world. So that's kind of a thumbnail sketch of what our theory is about. And using it, we've been able to explain at least 50 things that the current materialistic paradigm cannot explain. And I can name several of them, but not all of them have much meaning to a non-physicist. For instance, there's a thing called the Cabibbo angle. Cabibbo was an Italian physicist, Nicola Cabibbo, who discovered this, and the angle is actually a measure of the mixing of quarks in the data from the Large Hadron Collider. And we use that data to form the basis of our model. So our model is connected with the real world. Our mathematics is connected, the basic units are basic units of reality, the quanta of mass, energy. Mass and energy are equivalent through Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. So if you set c, the speed of light, equal to 1, which Planck did, it's called Planck units, he used 4 of the then known universal constants and naturalized the mathematical measurement system to those 4 constants. Well, instead of using those 4 constants, which are complex units of mass, energy, space, and time, I just decided we'd go straight to mass, energy, space, and time. So there's a quantum of mass, quantum of energy, quantum of space, and a quantum of time. And they're defined by the data from the Large Hadron Collider. Using this and something I call the calculus of distinctions, we're able to explain why elementary particles are spinning. The electron spins at the speed of light. All of the stable elementary so-called particles, elementary vortices, actually are spinning at a high rate of speed. The reason is actually Newton's third law, which says for every force, there's an equal and opposite force. And the universe appears to be expanding. And I say appears to be because that's the way it appears in what we call 3S1T, 3 space, 1 time. So what we see through our senses is 3 dimensions of space and 1 dimension of time. And we actually only experience 1 quantum of time, where our memory tells us that there's a past and our imagination tells us that there's a future. But when you realize that time is 3-dimensional, the same way space is, and pure mathematics, actually this works out beautifully because you go through the 3 dimensions of space, you can use in a quantized reality, which we actually have, everything can be described in terms of integers, whole numbers. In time, you have to use what the mathematicians call imaginary numbers. Now, it's unfortunate that they chose that word imaginary because it's not imaginary. It is a 4th dimension. And the mathematics shows that. I developed something called dimensional extrapolation, which is the movement from 1-dimensional domain to the next one. So if you're seeing a plane, a 2-dimensional domain, if you rotate and project out of that plane, you have the 3rd dimension. If you rotate that and project again, you have the 4th dimension, which is time. And there are some invariants that come out of that that allow us to build a whole model of reality that enables us to explain and predict things that the current paradigm cannot do. So
Dr. Close,
yes.
What's the response been to the findings that you've had? Because the modern scientists, mathematicians, there seems to be in every aspect of the world around us, the old versus the new. And I'm hopeful that the world of mathematics and science and logic is more accommodating of new facts and more responsive to it. what has the response been like?
Excellent question, because there are a handful of scientists who have accepted and understood our model,
Mm-hmm.
but a vast majority of them haven't, and there are several reasons. It's kind of interesting because Max Planck actually gave the reason. He said, science doesn't advance the way most people think. The story is that, oh, science studies things and discovers things and new things come up and we advance this way. He says, no, that doesn't happen that way. What happens is there was a book written about 45 or 50 years ago uh, um, about science, how science actually progresses. And it progresses by both a steady building of a paradigm or a model, and then the expansion beyond that, which is a paradigm shift. We've really only had two or three of those. Um, the first one that most people know about was going from an Earth-centered universe to a solar system, and that was centered around the sun and then the galaxies and the whole thing. That was a paradigm shift from the flat Earth, Earth's the center of the universe, um, to what we know now. The next one was Albert Einstein's relativity. And interesting thing is that I find that most people, even very intelligent people, even people with PhDs in physics, don't understand Einstein's theory of relativity at all. Um, he wrote an appendix just a couple of years before he passed away in 1952, I believe. Albert passed away. And the point of you have all sorts of physicists out there like Michio Kaku, the American-Japanese physicist, explaining the theory of relativity with a rubber sheet. I don't know if you've ever seen this, where gravity is explained by warping space-time. Einstein was really kind of bothered by that, and he wrote an appendix to his work, like I said, a couple of years before he passed away, when he said that there is no such thing as empty space, and there is no such thing as time without events. Time and space are not things the way mass and energy are. Space is only the structure of a field of energy and matter, and it turns out consciousness. So reality is made up of 9-dimensional fields of mass, energy, or matter, well, mass, energy, space, and mass, energy, and consciousness. Space and time are just the structure of that. If you take mass away, the energy away, and the consciousness away, there is no such thing as space and time. And so to say that space is warped by mass is wrong, but that's what they keep saying. To say that elementary particles are particles, little hard baseballs or ball bearings or whatever, is also wrong. Reality is a field of mass, energy, and consciousness. And the measures of space and time are measures of the structure. And all of the different realities are three-dimensional. That's why there are 9 dimensions, but they're all interacting so that, back to the Mobius strip, the Mobius strip is called a one-sided, and the easiest way to imagine it is to think of a belt, say 2 or 3, 4 inches wide, but it has no buckle and no end. It's a continuous belt, like a belt in a machinery factory or something that runs between 2 wheels that transfers the energy from an engine to some form of machinery. Now, if you take that belt and cut it and turn it 180 degrees and then put it back together again, and if you could do this so that you couldn't even tell that it had been separated and reconnected, you have a Mobius strip. And they call it one-sided because if you put your finger on it and trace it around, you will eventually come back to the very same place that you started, and you will never have crossed a boundary. So it tells you that there's only one side here. Now, there's also only one edge. If you go along the edge of the belt and go all the way around it, actually it takes 2 trips for the length of the belt. You re-emerge exactly where you started. The universe is the same way. If you could travel at the speed of light and you traveled in a straight line, you would eventually come back to the same place you started in the universe. The universe is like a big Mobius strip, except it's 9-dimensional, and it's self-referential, and it's expanding. Now, at the farthest ends, when we look at the excuse me, the nova, or the exploding stars that are the farthest away we can detect them with our current technology, they are moving away from us almost at the speed of light. This is an illusion in the sense that it is real in 3 + 1, in 4 dimensions, it is real. But in the 9 dimensions, you realize that it's an illusion, and that if you start here, so time travel is possible. I won't go into the details. I'm finishing a book right now that talks about this a little more. And some people, when they have near-death experiences, actually time travel.
Wow. Yes. I think Dan and Brinkley is one of those that spoke of it. There's a couple of people that have written books about what they've seen in the near-death experience that they've had. Whether it actually comes to pass or not, I think is influenced by the reality that we actually end up proceeding down, because we must have checkpoints where we can deviate or amend or soften the reality that we're creating. So personal theory there. I haven't mathematically backed it up.
Yeah. Well, there's something called the Akasha.
Mm-hmm.
You heard
the
that
Akashic
term?
Records?
The Akashic record.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. That's real, because what that is expanding your consciousness beyond the actually we all experience more than 3 dimensions. People don't understand what the term dimension is misused terribly. They use it for any variable. Well, in our model, we define dimension very specifically as extent. There are variables of extent and there are variables of content, and there are variables of intent. So energy gives us extent, and mass gives us content, and consciousness gives us intent. And these all work together. Also, our current theory of time is wrong. Time goes in cycles, the same way that seasons go in cycles. Time actually evolves in two 12,000 year cycles, up and down, so 24,000 years total.
Yeah.
And at the bottom of this was about 500 AD. About 500 AD was the lowest point, and it affects the general, it's called mental virtue, or mental and spiritual. Everything is actually, all of the evolution, all of the change that goes on in the physical world actually is, the impetus for that is spiritual, not physical. So the whole idea of evolution is correct, but it's spiritual evolution, not physical evolution.